very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. This evening, we are going to be talking economics. Um, as you know, there has been quite a debate going on about the rising prices of food items, and what to do about the rise in the food items. Of course, we had the pandemic, and that caused prices to shoot up, and then we have the invasion of Ukraine, and that is said to have an effect on the prices of food items and other items on the market. And quite a lot of analysts and commentators have been weighing in on what to do about the rise in prices. The government, in my estimation, has been quite lackluster in terms of how to deal with the situation. I've said on another program that I don't think this government has the capacity to deal with the challenges that come with, first of all, being an oil-producing economy, and how to handle that. And then with these factors, such as the pandemic and now the war impacting on our economy, when you take those developments into consideration and you put them within the context of our post-plantation society, which means that we are a particular type of economy. Even people like myself who are not trained economists, and most of us would know that we are what they call monoculture economy, or we used to be, as in the case of Guyana. The legacy of colonialism meant that we depended for the most part on one major product. And as we came into independence, we had all the challenges of trying to move from a plantation to a nation, the political challenges that came with that, and the economic challenges that came with that in the early period of independence. In our Caribbean, we had a debate about what needed to be done to effect that transition, what kind of economy we wanted for our independence and to move from colonialism. And there was the raging debate. Different countries took different policy positions. We had a question of nationalization here in Guyana, where we nationalized the sugar industry, the bauxite industry. And then we moved into the period of structural adjustment, where our countries had to go to the IMF, and the imposition of the IMF conditionalities. And we've been in that state for the last 3 decades or so. And then we have the situation here in Guyana, where over the last 5-6 years, we have discovered oil. So we have transitioned into an oil-producing economy. What does that mean for Guyana? What does that mean for the larger Caribbean? What does that mean for a Guyana that is ethnically divided a Guyana that is still has to grapple with the question of poverty. What does that mean? What does the discovery of oil mean for the other sectors of our economy? What does it mean for our agriculture, which remains still in our Guyana a major part of our economy? These questions have been at the forefront and continue to be at the forefront of our discourses, even if sometimes we pay lip service to them and we get bogged down with our party politics. The question is, what are we going to do in this new era as far as our legacies from colonialism are concerned? What are we going to do about poverty? How are we going to manage the oil economy to deal with the question of poverty? How are we going to use the coming of oil to deal with economic diversification? These are issues that confront us. As I said at the beginning, we have to deal with the question of the rise in the price of food items. That is the big issue today. And as I said, people have been grappling with it. We've been talking about local content, and recently we have heard the suggestion that Guyana should opt out of the Caribbean single market because there seemed to be a clash with the interests of our quote-unquote local content and our obligations to the Caribbean. And former foreign minister and finance minister Carl Greenwich recently weighed in, and I saw a lawyer from the PPP responded to that. That is a very important issue. What are we going to do about the sugar industry? The previous government attempted to deal with it, didn't do such a good job, didn't follow through. And then we have this government coming into power and vowing to reverse some of the attempts by the previous government to deal with sugar, promising its supporters to reopen sugar estates. And now we are noticing that they're saying that after all, they may not be able to reopen these sugar estates. But sugar, therefore, is still on our mind. And then we have this question of cash transfers, which is now being renamed cash grants. The question of cash transfers. How do we use some of the resources from oil to deal with the question of poverty? How do we give some of those resources to the ordinary people in a direct way, to deal with the question of poverty? More than 3 years ago, Professor Clive Thomas, renowned economist and long-standing member of the WPA, came up with a proposal, the Buxton proposal, and it's named the Buxton proposal because it was in Buxton that he unveiled the idea of cash transfers directly to the people as a means of dealing with their economic situation. Since coming to power, the government has been giving out money here and there, mostly to their constituency under the guise of cash transfers. But they're not doing so as policy. There is no oversight. They're just giving away monies like that, and they're calling them cash grants. So those are some of the questions that we are confronting. And so this evening, we are going to try to tease out some of those issues with Professor Clive Thomas, who needs no introduction to you. He's not only a respected economist, but he has also been involved in the political life of Guyana for 5 decades and more. During the time of the coalition government, he headed the State Asset Recovery Unit, SARA, and we'll try to see if we can get him to talk a little bit about SARA. You know, when the government came in, they closed down SARA. The question of state asset recovery, assets that were pilfered during the previous PPP government. Professor Clive Thomas had talked about the criminalized state, the merging of the state with the criminal sector. Hence, the need to recover assets that were misappropriated. What progress did SARA make? Why did the PPP close down SARA when it came in? Is the criminalized state back in action? We're going to try to get some of these answers from Professor Clive Thomas. If we don't get them in, all of them in this evening, we'll have to come back, bring Professor Thomas back in, answer some of these questions. What we are trying to do here is to have what I call an informed discussion about our economy, about the economic challenges we face, and about the prospects. You know, there's been this debate. Some people are claiming that, you know, the coming of oil means gloom and doom for Guyana. Is that really true? In spite of the challenges, can Guyana still benefit? Guyanese still benefit from our oil industry? Or is it gloom and doom? We'll ask Professor Thomas some of these questions. So welcome to Politics 101 on the Thursday evening. Share the link and let others know that we are having the discussion tonight on Guyana's economy. Let us bring in Professor Thomas. Professor Thomas, good evening.
Good evening, I'm David.
And welcome to Politics 101 again.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Am
I being heard clearly?
Yes, you're being heard very, very clearly.
Okay, good.
Professor, let's go back a bit. You have been central to the economic debates in Guyana and the Caribbean going back to the time of independence in the 1960s. You were part of a group called the New World, and along with economists such as George Beckford and Lloyd Best and others, Um, you have been part of the debate, part of that conversation about our post-colonial economic trajectory. Um, Let me ask you this. What is peculiar about the Guyanese and Anglophone Caribbean economies? What's peculiar about those economies?
Well,
I want you to answer that question within the context of the challenges that we have faced and continue to face.
well, there's certain challenges that are enduring based on the fact that we're very small economies. I mean, so small that on a global scale, we are really considered fleas among the list of nations of importance. We tend to import what we don't produce. We tend to produce what we don't consume at home. So we were then, at the time of independence, sugar exporters, and the consumption of sugar of what we produced of sugar was minimal compared to the income we earned from selling it overseas. And we tend, therefore, to buy everything that we needed: hospital goods, health, transportation, clothing, whatever it is from overseas. So we came a sort of an economy where we export what we don't produce and we import we what we needed as a result of that. So it was founded on a type of exchange that used our resources to do just exporting to import and with imports to buy. Now, what you said about inflation, I think is important for readers to understand. Because the layman thinks that inflation is just high prices. But inflation is not high prices. It's the rate of increase in prices. So we have a high rate of increase in prices taking place. And that is what makes it inflationary. Because high prices by themselves will remove inflation because they destroy the income and the purchasing power of people, of institutions, of firms, and therefore will not be able to buy the goods if it's just a high price. So it's the rate of increase of prices that really matter. And I think this allows me to introduce what I feel is the most important point for the discussion tonight. That in this modern period, what is turning out to be most significant is the rapidity of change. What we faced with in Ghana is not the pace of the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, but a pace of unprecedented nature in the evolution of the economy. For example, the Cream curve, or the curve at which we're making discoveries of oil, had been for Guyana the fastest the world has ever known. From 2019 December to the date, we have already discovered nearly 11 billion barrels of oil. And in fact, we can confidently say that that is an underestimate and it will be at least 25 billion by the end of 2022, because some of these results are already known to be there. And nowhere in history have we ever been able to generate such a fast confirmation of actual reserves of oil and gas in any part of the world. So the changes that are taking place are extraordinarily rapid, and that is what has given rise to the difficulty. So look, the time horizon we have to solve these problems is very short, and that is why it's very important for us to come to grasp them with them today. In the period that we've been talking about, I would say 3 months ago, the same President Zelensky, or whatever his name is, from Ukraine, who was urging that the Russians would never come in this country, is now asking people to send in airplanes, aircraft, and potentially start a third world war that might end civilization to protect him. That's the rapidity which things change before our eyes, and all this has happened in the space of 3 weeks. So the world is engaged in an almost an orgiastic rapidity of change that we've never seen before. And that is what has given urgency to the things that we are discussing tonight. Ghana has a limited time span for trying to make use of its oil and gas because this transition from carbon emitting energy to renewable energy is also going to be as rapid as it has been at the outset of the discovery of oil and gas. So we have like about 4 or 5 decades to change the entire construction and of the notion of energy and the mix of energy that the world uses. So our opportunity with oil and gas is a limited opportunity. We need to make maximal use of it. And to my mind, the important thing is that we don't want to look back after the few years to come and say, I wish I had known. And they all get stranded in some left under the ocean, 10 and 20 or 30 or 40 kilometers off the coast of Guyana. And we've not made use of a resource that we didn't put there, but which by pure serendipity, by luck, happens to be there for Guyanese to make use of. I'm not a religious man, so I won't say that God put it there for us. But the fact that it is there means that we have to exploit it. That is what human beings do. They try to exploit and make the best use of the resource, and that is what economists are trained to do and to think about. So people who are saying that we should leave it there under the earth until we get all these other things done are extraordinarily naive. No history of the world would give us any justification to leave people in poverty and say that we're pursuing some higher good. That does not remove them from poverty. The miserization of the people is the foundation of the effort that we try to make as a political group. And that is what should be the nature of social change, the challenges that we try to face and to generate a response to. So I'm not, would never support just idealistically sitting back and saying, well, it's better we don't have any climate disaster with the oil and gas by generating carbon emissions. And a president who is being celebrated around the world is in effect calling for a policy that could lead to global annihilation of civilization. And people will say, yeah, go help him. And the ridiculousness of it is lost on people because of a strange paradox. Some people try to explain it by saying that the people are Europeans, they're white, and therefore there's a fraternity spirit among them, and that is why they're going that far. That may be partially true because they won't treat Haitians that way. Nor would they treat Guyanese when we were migrating in our masses and in numbers back in the 1970s. But we can't rely on that type of response. We have to find out a way to figure how we can do the best for the people within the nation in which we were born and which we grew up and from which and in which we have been civilized. We have a responsibility to the groups that nurture us, that bring us to being. That is where our primary responsibility lies.
Yeah.
And we can't ignore them and say, well, we're thinking of a higher abstract good for everybody in the world. But the rest of the world is not doing that.
Yeah. So,
I've never heard anything said except the insistence of Biden that he will not provoke World War III to show that there's an appreciation of what is there at risk in this particular confrontation. But I don't want to get too far away from our subject. But I'm just trying to get to the point that ultimately the causes of inflation, all these things that we're seeing here, comes from the rapidity with things that are changing and from the fact that all these changes are ultimately very complex.
Very complex.
Very, very complex. So there are no simple solutions.
Simple solutions.
There's nothing you can go to and find a solution and pull it off the shelf and do it. It's like some people calling for change in the method of producing energy without using electricity or oil and gas. But there's no plug and play substitution for the lines and the electrical lines and the sockets or whatever it is we have to, to generate and distribute the electricity for the world to call on instantly to replace it. You have to construct an alternative. Now, in that spirit that I raised this issue of the Buxton proposal, because our primary economic problem is still the problem of poverty. And
And
I
Professor,
think that the only way to get out of poverty is a structured and direct assault on it. And the best mechanism that allows us to do that is the same fossil fuels that we happen to have found because God put it out there, as some would say, for us to find. Some would even go so far as to say providence has been given us that to remove our people from poverty. And that in mind is the primary objective. So the suggestion of the Buxton proposal is to make sure that everybody gets a basic universal income that takes them above the poverty line as defined and as measured in Guyana.
and we will come back to the boxing proposal, Professor Thomas. Given the particular nature of our economy coming out of centuries of colonialism and slavery, given our ethnic makeup and the problems that come with that, given the fact that, as you said, we don't have eternity, we basically have 5 decades to take advantage of what we have stumbled upon. Given all of those, what would you say are the priorities for Guyana, at least in the short term, in another decade, in the next decade? What should be our economic priorities? You've touched touched on the issue of poverty, so I suppose that's one. But what are the other priorities?
The two other priorities that I would make sure that I lead above all others. The next one is that the alternative to carbon emitting energy is renewable energy. And we, as a country, happen to be, fortunately, as well endowed with renewable energy capacity, that is solar energy, hydro energy, energy from biomass, cane, and all that, as any other country might be, given its size and so forth. So that is, to my mind, the priority for investment and development of Guyana. Become a primary an exporter of renewable energy to the hemisphere. So I would think that we should orbit our production to develop the specialty, because no country would ever be at the forefront of any activity unless you have the science of it well developed and leading that. We have proven that our people are capable. In every university you go, you find the wherever Guyanese are, that they are particularly skilled. We have the innovative capacity, and I think that we should focus deliberately for global leadership in renewable energy, using Guyana as a model. Many people will come here to help us because there are ideal circumstances for this. Whether you look at water, whether you look at sunlight, whether you look at wind, no matter where you look, whether you look at biomass, wherever you go, there are lots of opportunities for the alternative energy forms. And we should therefore be using the oil and gas as a bridge to future of the future energy that is expected to come after about 2070. That is where I feel that we should have and put down our marker for directing investment, science, and technology in every single thing in that particular priority area.
All right.
I think by developing the basic income of all the people, we also get to generate their skills, their entrepreneurship, and the development of activities within Guyana In other words, instead of trying to find a central area, a government or somebody to lead the initiative to invest and develop Ghana, by raising the capacities of people at the basic level so that everyone is allowed to come into the invention scheme, the entrepreneurial scheme, we rely on those people to generate the income opportunities, the production opportunities that would take us into a sustainable level of living going forward. That is
Let's
what has
so
happened in every country that is well developed.
yeah.
Every country that's strong industrial or service base has developed the capacity for the people to independently seek these means and opportunities because the orientation of society is to empower them with enough of the capital, the skills, the knowledge, and so forth that they require, the culture of entrepreneurship and so on that they need to be able to do those things to solve society problems as a collective and not as a group of experts in any room. So I don't have to find what will turn out to be a great idea 50 years from now today. I can rely on my countrymen and women to invent and make use of the cultural apparatus that we've developed over the years. New forms of designing housing, new cultural concepts. I don't know where they come from, but they will come, I'm sure of it. That is how I could think of something new, a way in which we might approach the economics of the country. They will also see ways in which they can develop and innovate and invent, because the cutting edge of all of civilization is the capacity to innovate, to invent, to make things that never existed before, to see things in a way that never seen before. And that is what we have to be able to invest in, the capacity of our people to reach that position.
Well,
So, in my mind, the problem is solvable, but it requires a constructive solution. It doesn't require gimmicks, and it doesn't require any effort at the opportunistic type solutions.
right.
I think those will be self-defeating.
Professor Thomas, when you first made the proposal, um, there were some people who argued that if you gave people money directly, um, they would not use it in a constructive way. They would spend it on all kinds of other things. And there's still some people who make that argument who say, take the money, spend it on education, spend it on health, don't give the money to people directly. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's a real possibility for some people, but the evidence in the world shows that most people have a greater interest in their own future and their own needs than outsider. There will always be marginal people who will show to the contrary. It's like insurance. The big argument taking place now in the country about whether the company should take out enough insurance to cover any oil spillage. There's a big debate going on. Now, anybody familiar with insurance and anybody knowledgeable about the theory of risk would know that the only way you can avoid a risk is by avoiding the action. And avoiding the action means we don't produce any oil or gas. So once you begin to produce oil and gas, you begin to take that risk. But there's also something that insurance has shown from time immemorial, and that is called moral hazard. Every time people take out insurance, there's a tendency for some, varying from negligible to important, to take greater risk. People tend to act more riskily when they feel that they're insured and they're covered with insurance. Some people, but not many people. And there's a statistical theory based on actuarial science that shows that might be 2-3% of the population. And that is what the firms use to base how they should calculate risk and what they should take. Then, once you are aware of the moral hazard, you try to temper your actions to avoid getting into that trap where you think you're insured that if you take any risk you like, because
So,
you feel the big insurance can cover it.
Professor, in the
But
countries
if
that
people were
have
doing that,
adopted,
insurance would never survive. Eh?
the countries that have adopted this policy of direct basic income, um, what what do people spend the money on?
They spend it on what they consider to be their priorities, which very often conforms to what is treated as the national priorities. Most of it is spent on what may be called investment goods, trying to build up the quality of their houses, trying to build up the health and welfare of their families. They tend to spend it on issues like that so that the quality of housing, the health and conditions of the population, they buy services in the community like plumbing, carpentry, things like that, which also empowers other people within the community. So it multiplies the income spread throughout the country. And if everybody has a significant basic income, then every community has a capacity to raise the level of employment and the level of income circulating within that community, and therefore create wider opportunities for everybody in that community. Because if you give, let's say, the $5,000, whatever it is, to every 100 households, you can you imagine if you just think of what it means in terms of income in Guyana dollars, how people would spend that to ensure they sustain a lot in their own households without even making an effort to do so. By just doing the things they would do every day. Go to shop and buy bread and things and nourish yourself. Go to see the doctor. Give more to your church and whatever it is it might be. And they in turn do more for the community in terms of social services. So those are the things that really matter.
And the PPP has been giving out these grants. Is that what you were talking about?
No,
Does
no,
that
no, no. That is designed to buy support, and it's episodic, and you never know whether you can get it or you can't rely on it. What is important about these universal basic incomes is that it's predictable, so it becomes part of your calculation of your life stream of income. So you can make decisions based on it, and not what if you're gonna get it next week, or when they're gonna feel like doing it, or when this minister will visit this community or not.
there is the
That
argument that there's the argument, CY, that if you give people these monies, it will lead to inflation. That word again, inflation. Respond to that.
well, it will if prices rise. I'm saying they have to continuously rise to be inflation, and they won't continuously rise unless incomes continuously rise. And then that
Mm-hmm.
will give a response to produce more goods and services. Because remember, there's a double-edged sword for Ghana. While generating this income from oil and gas, also has we also have a capacity to produce a lot of the things that we need to consume on a daily basis. Some of which we import, like flour, but can be substituted for in Guyana. Rice flour, we can think of all these things, cassava flour, all that. We don't want to go through that. But I'm saying all these things will now have an opportunity. We used to produce milk, but now it's imported tin milk and packaged milk. And this is where I think CARICOM comes in, because CARICOM is an important platform for any development and engagement of Guyana in the wider world. Our economy is too small and narrow for us to get economies of scale to make it profitable, to produce some of these things at a level which can compete with imports. But with a CARICOM platform and CARICOM protection, the opportunity of having a platform on which to build some of these capacities exists. So the call for the removal of CARICOM single market is, I think, a very nonsensical idea, because the whole idea is that Guyana, by moving into the production of oil and gas and having that capital, that basic income, if you pursued it, will now move into the category as a major exporter to CARICOM instead of being a major importer from CARICOM. And the exported things we send to CARICOM are primarily materials like rice and fish. Because when you go to any supermarket in the Caribbean, that's where most of the rice and fish from CARICOM would appear on the shelf. Bangameri is exported tremendously into Jamaica, where I lived.
Yes. So that just leads me down to this local income story. I know you are hesitant about local content. Sorry, you're hesitant about the local content thing
Yeah,
because
yeah. I have a personal view based on the years in which I used to work for CARICOM, not as a CARICOM employee, but did some research and things like that for CARICOM. I believe that Guyana should never pass any laws related to local content. It's like Antigua with a law and citizenship. Once you have a law in the books, you can be taken the to the
WTO.
yeah, the WTO. Sorry, it slipped me. And there you can be challenged for introducing laws that negate the right to competition. So I felt that anything like local content law should be built into the regulations and administrative procedures of the state, which means you have to have a government that has the confidence of the people and the sectors that were engaged in production and services and professional services and so on. That they will know that you're going to manage it in a way to give them a built-in advantage without putting it in writing. Now, once you said you can't do it, so my saying this means we can't do it anymore. Once you do that, you have no legal challenge to come. Look what Trump does with Z and from China. He calls him on the phone and tells him what he'll do.
Mm-hmm.
Z can't take that to the WTO. There's
So
no
you're
law
not.
he writes down in the book, and yet he will get his own way. And you
Yeah.
see the pushback in the change in the flow of trade.
So you're not necessarily against the protection of Guyanese markets and so
So
on.
I think that has to be done by skillful, committed. I think governments are elected to represent people, and their
Mm-hmm.
duty, and they should expect the confidence of the people to work around those regulations through informed common consent about the way in which you're going to do it. Which means that the government has to have a high reputation among its constituents for behaving with principle, and not giving things to the friends. You can't be part of a criminalized outfit and get away with that. But once you begin to doubt your credentials, your honesty, begin to doubt your even-handedness, your fairness, begin to doubt whether you're not supporting your political supporters or building support from political groups, they will treat the administrative approach and accept it. But once the government degenerates to the point where people feel that they're only giving to the friends and that type of thing, they want to see it written down. It's much like the National Resource Fund. I feel that we should not be given the sovereign right of our government to make decisions over how to invest monies earned from oil and gas over to anybody who claim that they are more impartial or more clairvoyant, more non-interventionist than the government itself. because the government is elected with those responsibilities to do those things. And it's a sign of government failure, poor governance, that people would expect that they should have an oversight committee to make sure the government spends the money in the way which it should be spent. That is not a proof of good governance. That's a consequence of bad governance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's
So
how I see those things. So I'm saying that would never happen in Britain. Britain is an oil producer, you know.
yeah.
It would never
So
happen in the United States. The United States is an oil producer. Can you imagine Trump or Biden giving any group of officials in the state authority to decide where the investment should go of their oil funds?
so what kind of management mechanism should we have, CY? Um, what kind of management mechanism should we have for the oil industry?
Well, I think that we should create a state-owned oil company. That way we
Mm,
should start.
okay.
Give that company independent powers to operate and negotiate as a commercial outfit, because if it's going to operate as a government outfit and can make losses, is that worth it? As a commercial outfit, and let them on the basis of commercial opportunities, commercial gain and profit and loss, make decisions on behalf of Guyana.
And what are the benefits of that approach as opposed to the approach that we are pursuing?
The benefit of the approach that I'm saying the approach that we're pursuing now is a sign of poor governance. But by doing it through that mechanism, you preserve the integrity of the government and the governance system,
Mm-hmm.
and remove the opportunity from them for doing what you are worried about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we don't
Should
have to put our money in the hands of international capital, because the result of it is that they specify the proportion of the money that must be held overseas arbitrarily as a fixed ratio, depending on what the government might choose to recommend to the board, and the board might accept. Whether it's 90%, 60%, 70%, we don't know. But that
see why
decision,
there's a
if it's
tension
made,
between protection of our environment and exploiting the oil resources.
yeah,
How
there's a
do you
tension.
propose we resolve that tension?
But we got to start from scratch. I thought we were making an effort under the previous government by appointing a director of energy, but I think Mark Baino, whoever it was, then the institutions were being put in place piece by piece, but I thought it was far too slow. Um, because the pace at which the industry was being transformed was extraordinarily rapid. And I don't think the speed of the institutional reformation was as rapid as should have been the case.
Mhm.
That was, I think, was the main feeling. But I don't think
Then,
there's anything of suspicion of irregularities or corruption involved. At least I never picked up any whiff of a scandal in that direction.
mhm. What about strengthening the EPA?
That is always important, because the biggest challenge today that industry poses to Guyana is that ExxonMobil is one of the most disreputable oil firms, and I would say firms of historical significance. It is
Mhm.
rotten to the core. I'm now writing on its oil spills. Right, even just today I just finished the article that it has a sorry record. I mean, and there's no sign of improvement. But globally, you might see a significant reduction over the generations. Spills going back to, let's say, the mid-2000s compared with 2020 at a global level, probably reducing the spillages by more than half. With Exxon, the shift in the spillage is from like about 275 spills a year or 267 spills a year, to use the exact figures, to 275 today, which means it's a marginal change, which means that they're showing scant regard for and doing a lot of talking for spills of oil spills and recklessness. And that is why I feel there's a real risk of moral hazard with them, because they're formed likely to reduce quality assurances and risk spillages, and therefore behave in a more hazardous way, a morally hazardous way.
Mhm. See, right before we shift from this subject, are we making too much about the contract that was signed, or are the critics justified in making the contract the biggest issue in town?
The contract is not the biggest issue. The contract is an important issue. But my theory is that all contracts improve with time because there's no binding forward contract that has ever existed. The closest to that was slavery. But every commercial contract involving contraction, legal contracting between parties with different needs and outlooks and holding different positions have always been adjusted over time. So I'm pretty sure that with the passage of time, this contract will be negotiated and adjusted as time rolls on. I have absolutely no doubt about that. But the
Professor
contract, yeah, I'm taking too long.
No. Continue.
I'm saying the contract yields just about between 50 and 52% of the net cash flow to Guyana. And many people want to raise that. But they tend to understate when they make their case the actual level of cash flow that is being generated again. But you don't have to behave like Exxon to lie about them or to exaggerate or involve in conjecture to make the case against them because their empirical record is terrible. And that's what I'm demonstrating right now.
The empirical record is terrible. Professor Clive Thomas talking to us about oil. We're going to take a short break now. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about state asset recovery. We're going to talk about sugar, and then we'll come to the what to do immediately about the rise in food prices. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with Politics 101 in about 30 minutes. Well, it seems as though the operator is not on cue with us. So, Professor Thomas, let's talk about SARA. You were the head of SARA,
Yeah.
and SARA arose out of your interest in what you call the criminalized state and the way in which.
No, it didn't arise out of that. It was a
Okay, go
United
ahead.
Nations recommendation.
But I know, but I was talking about locally, in terms of.
No, we had to agree to the act in 2008,
Uh-huh.
to the convention that gave rise to the need to create SARA.
And your argument in the public sphere about the criminalized state and the pilfering of state assets really popularized, that's what I'm trying to get at, popularized the issue, and we joined many countries around the world, as you said, in setting up Sarah. Do you regret um, encouraging the government at the time to go in that direction?
No, I don't regret it. I think there's only one, what I would call important bit of advice I would give if any country asks me to advise them how to go forward. And I believe that the burden of proof about the authenticity or legality of an asset should not be placed on those in charge of regulation to prevent corruption, but the burden of proof of its legality should be vested in those who have the property or the income that is alleged to have been stolen. You see, in the law, there is a big difference between information and evidence. We have a lot of information about what has been happening over the years, what people do and where their monies are and all that type of thing. A lot of information, which I would not describe, which I'm bound by law not to disclose. But converting that information to evidence that is accepted in a court of law where we are presumed innocent until proven guilty is extraordinarily difficult in these times. And that is why most countries have shifted the burden of demonstrating your rightfulness to the ownership of that asset to the person who has the asset. Because if it's left to the authorities, there is a difficult and time-consuming slog. We had cases before the court, but these never got to the hearing. The hearings. There are a lot of suspicions too about the oil contracts and that type of thing. Were, as you know, rife and still remain rife at this point in time. But the information we have is not evidence. And for someone unsteeped in the niceties of law, if this is what they call it, it's proven to be very difficult to convert information into evidence. Because not only do you have to go and prove that the person acquired these properties on the balance of probabilities by some illegal intention, but you have to provide a linkage of that to the actions of the person, that they must have a mens rea, an act that consciously deliberately to ensure that that happened. And that is sometimes almost impossible to prove. And that is where the law broke down. So if I had been a lawyer before and knew about as much about corruption law, anti-corruption law now as I do, as I do now, if I knew as much then, I would have opted for a solution or an agency that put the burden of proof onto the offenders and not, or to the alleged offenders, I don't want to call them offenders, and not onto the state.
But in spite of those challenges, would you say Sarah made some headway?
Yeah, because we were not only pursuing investigations, we had other parts of our mandate. We were training people in anti-corruption behavior. We did a lot of training in the police, important agencies like the GRA and this type of thing, government departments and so on. We had to train people in anti-corruption behavior. Because people but sometimes find it difficult to know what is anti-corruption behavior. For example, a constable in a country area providing some basic training in let's say police, the road traffic signs and that type of thing for constituents in a village, how to respond to them and how to behave in front of them. At the end of the course, somebody might come around to his house and offer him, a piece of, a hand of bananas or something like that. it'll be a corrupt practice for him to take it. But he wouldn't think so because he might say, well, he just be nice, I just trained him. But why is it a corrupt practice? Because it is felt that such a thing might make the person feel that they have an access to him and he's willing to receive gifts, which makes him vulnerable to exposure. And when put that way, they could see most of the people that we had to teach, or which we had to train, could see why it is considered a corrupt behavior because it did not mean that you're being corrupt in that sense. But they saw that as part of our cultural norms. They never thought it was something extraordinary not to do. So the population as a whole doesn't have an idea of what in fact corruption is. And you know, people will get money to provide, let's say, street works in a village too. And everybody will complain about the rate of progress. But nobody will get together and form a monitoring committee to photograph on their cell phones the thing every day so they could get a sense of if the progress is being made. And things like that could change the efficiency of projects, you know, done by government departments using taxpayers' money. Simple mechanisms like that. So we managed to reach a lot of people in courses demonstrating things like that. So I felt that in that important area we were very useful. We also mediated a lot of cases and a lot of issues. Some people gave restitution for underpayment of assets they got from the state. But we don't, we bound not to, we could only report that in a parliamentary report.
Mm-hmm.
And the government peremptorily fired us without asking for any report.
Right.
And seized, and all the documents were left because we got a notice of no longer employed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we were asked to leave the premises by 4.
Wow.
So every single thing, all those things will just not be recorded anywhere in the corpus of the activities.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think the government moved with such haste to close down Sarah?
Well, we had some of the principals in court too.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Those trials are coming up.
Right. Professor, let's turn our attention to sugar. That's another of your abiding interests, and over your long career, you've studied sugar and its relationship to the economy and so forth. Are you at all surprised that this government has not been able to reopen any of the sugar estate that it has promised?
No, I'm not surprised. I think many people forget, including the previous government, that prior to the reconstitution of the board of directors, there was a commission of inquiry into the sugar industry. That commission of inquiry, I think, went at great length and with a lot of diligence, using experts that have been in the industry for donkey's years, some of them living abroad in the United Kingdom and so on, but who used to run the estates and all that sort of thing. We had a tremendous cadre of skills in that commission of inquiry. And I operated as chair of the board for 1 year, and it was making use of that report. That was the basis for my activities and for everything that we did. I did not deviate from it in one way, other than if some new development had occurred. we were developing alternative programs. The primary program that we were about to launch was to convert most of the estates into fish farms, starting with the ones across the river in West
Wales,
Namar. Yeah,
Wales.
yeah, West Namar. Now, I don't know what has happened to that program. I haven't heard a word about it since, but I don't stay close to the industry, close enough yet to know. We had also trained and discussed with the workers opportunities for alternative employment. One of the persons I see in your program regularly, Vianna Thomas, she is responsible for that program under the leadership of Oil John, who was the director from the Booker's days and therefore knew a lot of the industry, exceptionally knowledgeable. So we were doing a lot of basic things that were very important. We were trying to sell the sugar estate lands to generate our own income. I suggested $25 million an acre, and the denunciation some of the people put on me for expecting such a high price, they call it, was unbelievable. Some of our friends, they say people would never pay that. And then within months of my getting there, one of the overseas baseball companies wrote and asked to buy some, should I say, lands to set up a trading camp for the one of the overseas baseball teams in the United States. All this is confidential, so I can't really say what it is without permission. Um, and they're willing to pay way above that. So it was a difficult situation, but most people thought that the sugar industry could be turned around overnight. But they couldn't. It needed 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even as much as 7 years to turn it around. It's like trying to turn around. But I usually use this example: a battleship on its own axis in like a dime. You can't do that. The industry has long historical ties, and we try to set about to do it in a humane way. I mean, maybe I haven't expressed enough regret that we were never allowed to pursue that alternative. All the things that we're talking about now, we had advanced programs in rural tourism, using the estate housing as the basis for encouraging that tourism. All that was already in train. Been invited experts, done feasibility studies and some of these things. So it was not a year spent doing nothing. It's a year of a lot, as you know, I don't do nothing. It's a year of a lot of effort. And I had a lot of support from the board members and the chief executives. In this endeavor, they saw the vision of it, and they gave me immense support. So I was quite disappointed, but I wanted to be felt that I wanted a job. So I never really made any representations on it at that level. I just took the political decision as it was. But it
See
was
why?
totally misguided because what they ended up by doing is, as you know, borrowing $30 million, billion dollars
Yes.
to refurbish a company to sell it. When all you have to do is to reduce the price by $30 billion and give it away. If you can't get a price above that, then you don't have the liability. But you give it away on the conditions that require the people to do what you intended to do. That is the fish farm. So if a private enterprise were to be the catalyst for it, that's what he would have done. It never made sense to borrow all that money against sugar because it burdened it with debt. And made it what like Exxon, which is a zombie corporation, an indebted corporation that can't make enough money to pay off its debt and barely survives by paying the interest on the debt.
See, but before we go off this issue, the the severance,
Yeah,
as far as the workers are concerned, the 7,000, but I understand it's closer to 4,000 than 7,000. And some malicious people have laid that decision at your feet, saying you advise the government to fire the workers. Clearly hearing that.
somewhere. Well, I mean, of course, it's ridiculous if we're going to be turning around the industry. We had decided to rationalize the estates.
Mm-hmm.
That was true. We were reducing the number of estates, and we were going to focus on the development of the packaged sugar. We were going to concentrate on the estates that could possibly produce a price so the estate could survive, getting enough income and costs down to survive as an estate, although they will have required some subsidies still, but not as much as some of the other states like Wales. So that was the issue that we were facing. The industry cannot produce sugar over 40 plus cents per pound and sell it for less than 40 plus cents per pound and survive. It's not a surviving form. It's worse than a zombie form because the dead form is a socialist lemon. It's a state-owned liability. And my concern was that with the oil and gas in process at that point in time, I didn't want the government to feel that they should be pumping the oil and gas surplus into the subsidization of sugar. That is why I opposed it. I would have opposed it. Never came to me for a decision. The $30 billion loan, I would never even thought of it. Because that is what you're doing. You're using public funds to subsidize a state corporation, knowing full well the state corporation could not survive even with the subsidization, which is what is playing out now.
Mm-hmm.
But the nature of politics is such that, of course, the PPP has a lot more interest in sustaining incomes in the rural areas than maybe the AFC and the PPP, PLC thought at the time. But it wasn't an abandonment. I could never do that. I mean, you have to ask me whether because we were very concerned about their incomes,
Yeah.
about their livelihoods. I mean, that is why we employed the Albiana. It was part of a conscious effort to make sure that they were diversified into alternative operations. We also had negotiations with firms in Trinidad and Tobago. We had negotiations with the firm that produced the palm the palm that used to sell in Europe in the interior, the French firm,
Mm-hmm.
and they were trying to make briquettes. They were trying to sell on the basis of green energy, sugarcane stumps and humps, and the cut cane made into briquettes. So they could sell the green energy, an entirely new product,
Okay.
which is why I was talking to you about innovation, because you're not going to move into a new area without having a scientific advantage to be competitive. And that is what they brought the opportunity to us. They were trying it in Suriname as an initial pilot project. and they were encouraged to come over to Ghana. One of your colleagues was responsible for that initiative
Mm-hmm.
because I think they were a co-partner in it. I probably would have headed the venture, which I thought had a great opportunities for Ghana being a leading green power energy exporter. Start their renewable campaign based on briquettes made of sugarcane husk because the sugarcane is the fastest growing plant in the world and it produces a bulk more than 120,000 tons, million tons a year. It produces the bulk that is needed for heating up homes in the winter. And the farmers convinced from the market research that by just saying it's green energy, and of course it would be a new energy too, that the European market will latch on to it, that we as the pioneering group would have gone mad. They wouldn't even listen to me. We never able to put any of our alternative proposals to them.
Mm-hmm.
So all that probably went down the drain. Because Hanneman is no longer there, he's the chief executive officer.
Right. Yeah. See, well, let's close out on this question of what to do to bring immediate relief to people as far as the prices of food items are concerned. Is there an open and shut solution to that? I know you started the discussion by talking about the complexities of inflation and so forth. Um, if you were asked what to do to help families cushion the impact of the rising food prices, what would you propose?
I would put to the forefront right now myself the development of the basic income program
Mm-hmm.
because it is difficult to convince anybody in the world, and you just have to step back from it and see. Ghana is projected to be the fastest growing country in Earth this year by not only one organization, at least 3 or 4 international organizations. It's impossible to claim to them that you suffer more deprivation than anybody else. GDP may be a poor measure, but it's a measure, and it's the only one we got that is universally accepted. And given that reality, it can be difficult to explain to anybody that you can prove that Ghana is worse off because the same rising food prices should be helping where you started the program in.
Mm-hmm.
That the bulk of the community are farmers. The largest number of employed workers in Ghana are farmers, are in the farming areas, rural areas, and that's where the inflation is rising the fastest. So the only way out of that paradox, I think, is for them to come straight to the population and say, look, we have to accept a reality here that bad as things are and as difficult as it is going to be, we are not the worst off country in the region or the world. We have a medium term to long term program to deal with that. We will set about to introduce this box and propose a structured basic income, things that nobody will ever end up being worse off than they would have been before based on the transfer of income from the oil and gas sector to directly to those who are below the poverty line. And that's how I proceed. Because
They have
then
set
anything else
aside.
will be a gimmick. We see some people calling for removing income tax.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I told you in a discussion we had before this program that is not everybody who is poor pays income tax, any income tax. Most of them, I imagine the majority of them are outside the tax debt. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the ideas behind the universal basic income is to put people within the tax net because they have to report that income
Yeah.
as a condition for getting it. You know, you computerize it and you give everybody an identity. So they become fall within the tax net as a result. And the other thing is that some people say remove income tax and use other taxes, because the government can't exist without providing services to people. The hospitals got to be run, the schools got to be run, all these things got to be done, and we have to finance them. And if you don't finance them from taxes and income, whatever else you use is going to be more regressive. That is going to impact the poor more than the rich. Disproportionately the poor, because once it's a flat tax, a tax on an item or a retail tax or whatever it is, people who spend a lot of their incomes on retail items like food and so on, poor people, a higher proportion of the income on food than rich people who can afford other services and so on. Those people end up being the most penalized by the new taxation system. So there are no short-run gimmicks. There's only a long-term, medium to long-term structural program. And by saying medium, what I mean is that you may not start at the target level of 5,000 US, but you graduate the payment to meet 5,000 US when our oil production exceeds 1.1 million barrels a day. Means it's likely to go up to nearly 300 barrels a day by the end of this year. So you give probably, the ratio share of that 25% as a start, and you graduate it at the wells or the platforms, the fields, the oil fields come into operation. Because by 2026 we should be producing 1 million barrels. And certainly by 2030 we will be producing between 1.5 and 2.5. You see, people still think of it as a small oil producer, but it's not. It's number 19 in the world as it stands in 2025.
Number 19.
Right now, it's number 19 in terms of reserves. Known reserves, declared reserves by Exxon, not my reserves. Not the projected figure of 25 billion barrels, which they will declare by the end of this year, I'm sure. Because most of the firms who are advising investors to invest are using the 25 billion right now. So if you go into one of these paid services, as I've had to do to get some data, they're projecting that the actual reserve comes in 25 billion and not the continued statement of 11 billion. That but they usually put 11 plus. That Exxon is using because they don't want to appear to be pushing up their claims rapidly.
Professor Clive Thomas here, talking about oil, sugar, state asset recovery. We've come to that point where it's program time. Professor Thomas, any closing thoughts?
No, I hope I wasn't too much all over the place.
Well, the program was designed for that. I mean, economics is like any of areas of endeavor. They're interrelated, and so one has to speak about them within the context of the larger political economy. So I want to thank you, Professor Thomas, for coming on tonight and bringing to bear on the program your expertise on these issues, and I'm sure that our audience is more informed tonight than they were before the program. Thank you very much, and thank you, the audience, for staying with us. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday.
It is time for change in the Guyana Teachers Union, and two candidates, Vanessa Kissoon, and Coretta McDonald are running for President and General Secretary respectively. Listen, as they tell us why teachers across the country should vote for them in the election.
You're running for president of the Guyana Teachers Union. Why are you running?
I believe that it is time that the Guyana Teachers Union and teachers get the type of representation that they deserve. I believe that it is time that teachers be respected. And I honestly believe, Dr. Hines, that I am the person to take the Guyana Teachers Union and the teachers of this beloved country forward and into the future.
What have you learned about your stint as General Secretary that makes you want to continue?
Coretta McDonald is a part of a team, and I like, and I've been promoting team. The fact that you're asking me this question about what I've learned, I have learned to be even more resolute against this regime. I've learned that. I want to say to teachers, on that ballot paper, you're going to see the various positions. So you'll have president, you have 2 names there. Look for Vanessa Kissoon, put your X right there. For first vice president, you're going to see 2 names. Look for Lesmin Collins, put your tick there. For second vice president, you're going to see 2 names. Put your tick to one of those 2 names. Then you're going to see the position of General Secretary. You know where you have to put that, Coretta McDonald.
Vote Vanessa Kissoon for President of the Guyana Teachers Union and Coretta McDonald for General Secretary.